Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are The Beautiful Truth, an editorial that celebrates the individuals and businesses who embrace life with purpose to create a kinder, greener, and more equitable world. And I'm delighted to have with me today somebody who very much embodies that spirit, Hakan Bulgurlu. Hakan is the CEO of Arçelik, which is one of the largest household appliance companies in the world, but he also describes himself as a climate activist. He took the helm of Arçelik in 2015, and he's made it his mission to make the business more sustainable. Arçelik has been an industry leader in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for 4 years in a row. Arçelik achieved the highest score in the DHP household durables category for the 4th year in a row, scoring 87 out of 100. And of course, he also climbed Everest in 2019 to raise awareness for the environment. It was a life-changing experience for him and became the subject of his book, A Mountain to Climb. As a lot of you no doubt know, we are doing this event to also raise funds for the earthquake appeals after the earthquake that happened a few weeks ago across Turkey and Syria. Funds will be donated to the Darüşşafaka Society, the Mother Child Education Foundation, Needs Map, Support to Life, and Search and Rescue Association, the AKUT. So, Hakan, over to you. Tell us, we'd love to start before we watch the film to hear how the situation is in Turkey.
Yeah, Adam, first of all, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. It's lovely to be with you again. I just hope my wife Stephanie is watching. I sent her the link because I don't get introduced that way very often. It'd be nice for her to hear that.
Excellent.
And you know, when I say it, it's hard to believe. The earthquake was devastating. You know, it was the kind of event which is calamitic in scale. In fact, because it was shallow, I think it's uncomparable to past earthquakes that you know, we had in Sichuan or in Japan, and the damage was absolute. I don't like rounding off numbers when people are concerned. You know, they say 50,000 people lost their lives. I think the true number is far higher. And the tragedy is that culturally families live together, you know, multi-generations in one building in that part of the country. And I think entire families disappeared together. So we'll never know the true number. But it's definitely one of the worst disasters that humanity has faced in the past. The damages are incredible, and rounding here is absolutely fine. But you know, people say about 100 billion. But the losses to the cultural heritage of the area, of course, is permanent and unmeasurable in terms of dollars. But what we can do is really try and help rebuild people's lives.
And Arçelik has been involved in those rebuild efforts. Can you tell us a bit about what Arçelik's been doing?
Yeah, I mean, our response really, as we're a love mark in Turkey, essentially as a brand, and we have 3,000 retail stores across the country, 11,000 service technicians. So our infrastructure is very far and wide, and our reach is long. We were on the scene literally a couple of hours after the earthquake, and our search and rescue teams helped pull out, as coached, more than 200 people alive from the rubble, which I think was the most meaningful, as it's saving lives. And then we continued by providing 12,000 hot meals, hot nutritious meals. It's easy to provide a hot meal if you're giving rice and lentils, but it's very difficult to give fresh vegetables, fruit. Think of the logistics, the cold chain. We were giving, and we still are giving, 12,000 hot meals a day. I never had any idea how much that costs, by the way, but a lot of money. And also we have 11 laundry trucks, which are washing the laundry of about 1,000 families a day, which is a lot of laundry. And you know, I've now come to realize that's probably the most meaningful service we're giving people, because it's a real need. And people are attached to their land. They need to stay, they need to farm. You know, they don't want to leave. Even if their buildings are in rubble, they still want to stay attached to where they grew up, where they came from. So it's very meaningful to give those services on the ground. And lastly, we are leading the formation of a 5,000 container city, which will at least temporarily give comfort to about 20,000 people. And of course, that comes with all of its social areas, schools, hospitals, even an animal pen for goats, you know, for children to play with. And that should be ready about mid-May.
Because I think from what I'm understanding, it's not just the sort of immediate response that's needed. It's really going to take time for people to get back on their feet, and it's those things that you don't even think about when it comes to rebuilding an infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, that's exactly true. The emergency response you see and help pouring in from the world lasts about a month. And then on the second month or third month, there's generally very, very few NGOs left on the ground.
Right.
And this is simply too big for the government to deal with on their own. It's just not possible. I mean, think of it. It's the entire size of Holland in terms of geography.
Okay.
And we're talking only about the big cities, but even the small cities that have been ravaged, or the villages, have absolutely no help at the moment. So thank you very much for putting this together. Every little penny helps, and all the money gathered today is going towards helping in one way or the other. Absolutely. And it's being matched actually 1-to-1, which makes it even more meaningful.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, let's get on to the film. This is a film that we made about your journey. I don't want to say too much about it. I want people able to watch it, and then we'll discuss afterwards. So, Thomas, over to you.
The love of the sea has always been with me. One of my favorite places to go when I was younger was a beautiful beach in Thailand. If you were to ask me to describe what heaven looks like, that's what it looks like to me. And I took my children there to share that experience, and we rented a boat. There was massive excitement. We swam ashore, and unfortunately, it was knee-deep in plastic. Imagine decaying dead birds, stepping on syringes, no idea. And my daughter, who was 4 at the time, I had to grab her, and she just looked up at me and she said, "Why?" And I couldn't answer. I could not give her a reason for why that beach was in that state. And that was a real turning point for me. Running a big platform like Arçelik and being aware of our processes, the materials we use, I became increasingly concerned about how little was expected of you as a leader. I felt very uncomfortable about how everything was normalized. If you looked at the business's numbers, everything was great. But inside, I had a little storm brewing. I felt time was just passing. I was escaping the uncomfortable feeling by busying myself all the time and surrounding myself with people and things to do. I was numbing myself a little bit, maybe, like we all do. I had a good friend, David, who pulled me aside one day and said, "Look, I have never seen you alone, not even for a second." So I thought, obviously, there's something here. I need to face myself and stop patting myself on the back with other people's judgment of how good things are going, and really decide what I need to do. What is it that'll make me happy and make me feel fulfilled? What could I do to make a difference? I had this fire burning inside me because I knew what was happening in terms of the climate, in terms of ecosystem destruction, but I was really struggling talking to people about sustainability. I had the audience, I had access to business leaders who would give me their time, but nothing would ever get through because sustainability is something abstract. You're talking about, unfortunately, labels like 2030, 2050. Everybody thinks it's someone else's problem. It makes it very difficult to get people to focus. I had thought about going to Everest, and it suddenly sparked this thing in my head saying, well, wait a minute. What if I combined Everest with sustainability to kind of raise awareness? Because Everest, everybody wants to hear. I could change my colleagues' attitude towards sustainability. We always had it as a vision statement in the company, but never really had it in the center of everything we do. If you'd asked me before I went, I would have said, this is just purely to get the sustainability message out, the awareness. It's just a tool. Of course I can climb Everest, I can do anything. I read everything I could, talked to all the subject matter expert, hired the best organizer, trained more than I've ever trained. I did everything right. So I thought, if I've done all of that, I'm going to be better than all the others. I'm just going to get up there and get down, and it's done. Of course, you figure out very quickly when you get there it's not true.
We're on a pass, 5,000 meters, and that's the first sighting of Everest.
Base camp looks like Mars to me, you know? It's just rocks and thin air, extremely cold at night, extremely hot during the day, so you're never comfortable and your body doesn't want to be there. The fact is that nothing lives there. You know, you leave some seeds or crumbs of bread on the ground, come back a week later, it's still there. And it kind of makes you think, what the hell am I doing here?
We've now left base camp. We're in great spirits, having a lot of fun. My only worry is I'm gonna have to spoon with 2 Frenchmen up there, which isn't exactly my ideal situation for a holiday. But the views are incredible. I'm meditating, taking step after step. I'm in a good place, and I wanted to share it with you.
After one day, all of us were bloodied completely in our airways. All of our feet were full of wounds. I mean, you could tell, you know, these super prepared, high ego, successful businessmen were not suited to the mountain. And every day, the mountain told us a little bit more of that. The death zone is above 7,000 meters, basically, where the North Col is. And you have to climb this ice wall that looks like the winter wall in Game of Thrones. And at the top is this very thin strip of ice where you set up the tents. Very intimidating place. And from there, the amount of oxygen available to you is far less. Your body starts slowly deteriorating and consuming itself. And there's only a limited amount of time you can stay there. 4 days, 5 days max, but not longer. That's an altitude where if you sleep without oxygen, there's a very high likelihood you won't wake up. You just have to fight through the night with this drowning feeling the whole time. Lucas, one of the most celebrated and experienced organizers of high-altitude mountaineering at 7,000 meters, pulled me aside and said, look, from here on, you're on your own. If you can't walk, if something happens to you, you're staying on the mountain. Nobody's going to carry you down. You are on your own, you look after yourself. And that really sinks in, because until that moment, I thought I've hired the best organizers, I've really prepared myself. If I've done all of that, of course I'm not in danger. That scared me. It really scared me. And then seeing the dead bodies. One of the curses of high altitude is that you're completely preserved. You can see the faces, the expressions, and the contorted arms. When I started seeing all of this, I said, that's it, I'm going back. And the Austrian guide who was behind me said, you know, Hakan, I'm sorry, but it's much more dangerous to go back from here now because of the crowd behind us. The chances you slip or an accident happens are extremely high. The sheer level of exhaustion that's continuous kept forcing me to question myself and my decisions and why I was there. Every step I took, I became more aware of how futile this approach was and how unimportant my life was. At that altitude, you're seeing the curvature of Earth, you're seeing the deep blue of space, and you understand that your survival is completely dependent on nature. How crazy of humanity to think that we could battle nature and win. Who you are, what you've done, none of that matters. And the more I realized that, I think the more I changed as a person. The summit was euphoric for a moment. You know, it's the size of 2 ping pong tables. A few moments later, the Sherpas left and I was alone. I was looking down at the world. How on earth I was going to get down was beyond me. For me, the journey up was full of learnings. I was doing a lot of work on myself. All of that distracted me from the real danger for a while. On the way down, none of that was there. The feeling was overwhelming that I wanted to get back to my family, I wanted to get back to my children. If only I could get down alive. And when I got to advanced base camp, my feet were in pieces, you know, I was in horrific pain, but at least what I felt is relief. And what should have taken sort of 5-6 hours to walk down to base camp took me 12 hours. And those 12 hours, I think, were the most transformative in my life. I cried the whole way. One thing the Himalayas has is scale. Everything is huge and you are so small. And everything that you have worried about in your life up to that moment feels just pure stupidity. And you keep scolding yourself on how could you be so naive to think that those were the important things in life? How could I have missed these things? How could I have not told my father that I love him more? Or how could I have not really focused on my children when they came up to me and said, Dad, let's play. No, I have an email to send. No, I'm drinking my coffee. Later, never again. Because that kid is not going to ask you twice or 3 times. And then, of course, you get caught up in this, well, what was I thinking? What if something happened? What would happen to them? I mean, but I couldn't even call them. I couldn't. I was crying the whole time. That ego I had going up of this prepared person, I can do anything, was, thank God I'm alive. And I'm so grateful for nature to have allowed me to survive. When I got back, I was very, very different. I became obsessed with time. I had no time to waste. I have much less patience for PowerPoint presentations talking about how good we're doing things. I just want to hear about the problems and solve them. It sped the transformation of the company we manage into a purposeful business. And then, of course, everything changes because then everyone's aligned around the same goal and it brings success with it very, very quickly. Today, we have a business that is disrupting our industry because we're focusing so much on the environment and the climate and reducing emissions. What we were doing as humanity, making promises, but we were delaying implementing those promises. And the impact of delaying those promises every day made it more irreversible, the damage we're doing. Once you start seeing that, the sense of urgency, it overtakes everything else because you know that if you don't do the right thing today, it's going to be too late to do it tomorrow. And therefore, you're faced with a moral choice. Will you be able to look your children in their eyes and say, oh, well, I didn't really realize and I was going with the bandwagon? Or do you want to say, I saw this coming and I did everything in my power to stop it from happening? I chose the latter one.
So Hakan, thank you, one, for sharing your story, and I encourage everybody to read the book actually as well, which I read first, and I think the reason it really spoke to me and the team is because you talk about this kind of shift in existential perspective as well before talking about sustainability. And I think that that's one of the keys that we need. And so I guess my first question is really, how do we encourage people to take that shift so that they act more aggressively on climate action?
Yeah. Wow. What a summary. I mean, seeing it again takes me right back there. I still can't believe I took my gloves off on the summit. It's the dumbest thing I've probably done in my life. The tips of my fingers still hurt, when I see that moment. The shift, of course, has to be personal and it has to be authentic, Adam. If you don't believe it yourself and you don't start living your life in that manner, then you really can't lead an effort. So authenticity is really key. For me, the personal shift happened when my daughter looked me in the eye, as I say in the documentary, and said, why? And I didn't have an answer. And actually, I knew that as a leader in the appliance industry, I am part of the problem, because the amount of virgin plastics we use is staggering. And I thought, well, I can't really give an honest answer. So I decided that when my daughter is older, an adult, I want to be able to look her in the eye and say, I was part of the problem. I admit it. But I did everything in my power possible to stop or change what was happening and to leave a better world behind. And to be able to do that, it has to be the priority. And once it is the priority, I think it really changes the way you act. It changes the way you calculate things. One thing that I find very useful, and I share at Arçelik, obviously we are a for-profit business, and the P&L is the number one factor in terms of making the business sustainable, right? You have to make money to be able to invest, to be able to keep the business growing or continuing. But we also have a balance sheet that measures carbon. And this is a unique thing where every action we do, any investment we make, we actually measure the impact in terms of the carbon we're putting in the atmosphere or the carbon we're taking away from the atmosphere. And that allows us to keep a balanced view of what we're doing vis-a-vis where we stand in terms of decarbonizing the company, while we are trying to grow the business or enter new markets or build new products. And I find that useful. That kind of keeps things measurable. Another thing we do, because you asked how do you keep it going in a way, is that we have we're only something like 350 weeks away from 2030, right? I use that analogy a lot. When I started talking about this, there was more than 600 weeks, Now it's only 350 weeks left. That's very, very little time. We have a weekly sort of scorecard of how we're doing. And that kind of keeps things in perspective as well. Mind you, though, 2030 is very arbitrary, right? I mean, it's just a line in the sand that people like talking about.
I think that is one of the things which is a challenge that we come up against again and again is that abstract nature to climate change. People talk about it in ways that are very difficult for you to connect to. The first time that we hit 40 degrees in London last year, suddenly you kind of go, oh, this is happening. This is closer than we think. How do we make it something that's tangible so that people understand? You talked about this measurement. Are there any other ways?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that we assign these abstract dates, right? And we say by this date. So the primary measurement we have is by how much we're going to allow this world to warm. And that's a very average temperature. And, we've been fighting for a 1.5 degree warmer world, but we say 2100. I think that's the biggest mistake we've made. I mean, basically, scientists are not amazing communicators, right? So what's happened is it's allowed a problem that is actually around the corner, literally around the corner and happening today, but to be talked about in terms of generational timelines. 2100 is a generation away, at least, maybe two. So that's the biggest problem, and that's what makes it abstract. However, having said that, young people are angry, right? They have discovered that here we are, a bunch of middle-aged men who actually now are in leadership positions, whether it's government or business. And I say men deliberately. I wish it was more women. We've created the problem. A big part of the problem is recent, right? The last 20, 30 years. And we're not part of the solution because, we'll be retired by then. So we pay very little attention I'm generalizing now,
Yeah, sure.
onto what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years, because we see it as the next generation's problem. Now, here's the issue. Young people are saying you're creating a problem that you are talking about solving, but you're not really doing anything. You're talking a lot about it, but you're not doing anything. And we are not at the table that is actually creating the solution to this problem, but it is our lives that is going to suffer the most through this. And those young people are now getting older, coming into the workplace, and they're becoming consumers. And actually, as consumers, they vote with their money on choosing the company's, services and products that is doing the right thing or not. So I think that's going to be the defining change, people voting with their money. The second issue is that, unfortunately, the weather events and extreme or the extreme events which cause insurance claims are much more frequent and much more severe, right? The average extreme weather event now costs about 80 to 85% more than it did in the past, and is happening 4 times more frequently. So people are impacted everywhere, whether it's floods in Pakistan or it's drought in Italy. I mean, as we speak now, there's no water in the canals in Venice. I mean, it's unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Or there's no snow in the Alps. I mean, people that like skiing, for example, I like to point out, because, we talk about the 1.5 degree average heat that we're aiming for in 2100. And by the way, many now are trying to abandon that in favor of a 2 degree warmer world, which I'm fiercely against, because once you start abandoning targets, you can abandon the next one as well. Now, we have warmed about 1.2 degrees since industrial ages at the moment, right? And we can see the impact of 1.2 degrees. But actually what's happened, since we're in Europe, in the Alps, it's warmed twice as fast. So the average temperature increase is more than 2 degrees. As a result, we are seeing much less snow, fewer ski days, and there's a whole industry that depends on that. So there's a financial impact is quite severe. If you look at just the agricultural impact, it's going to be about 65, 70 billion a year in Europe alone that this climate change is going to cause. It's a long answer to your question, but I believe that nature is teaching us a lesson so fast that everybody is going to have to prioritize this, whether they want to or not.
But I guess the next question is then, especially because I have seen your career, and I know you've got contacts in with lots of different leaders. Are leaders really talking about this seriously? At the bottom line, a successful company is still one that is profitable, not one that's necessarily achieving sustainability targets.
This is a dilemma that's being fought in every boardroom, I think, around the world. I mean, I see 2 kinds of leaders. First of all, everybody's talking about this because they have to, right? There's no way around this anymore. But there are 2 kinds of leaders. One who has a sustainability and a communications team that gives them a piece of paper that they read from, and they won't take questions because they don't get engaged. They don't really know what they're doing. And it's basically doing the minimum that they have to do, that regulation forces them to do. Then you have leaders who genuinely believe that they have to do this to survive as a business in the future. Therefore, again, profit driven, but they do basically more as a hedge. I'll give you an example. Today, a couple of weeks ago, the cost of a carbon credit crossed 100 euros. If you were to take that, now in the future, we don't know what that cost is going to be, but in my mind, the only solution we have to this problem is actually costing carbon. And for every goods and service that we use, there will be a cost of carbon embedded in that. If we were to look, let's say, 5 years down the line, not too far, let's say 4 years down the line, the cost of a carbon credit may be 500, maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000. We don't know. And as a business, you will be forced to buy those credits. Make no mistake. I mean, because the pace of warming at the moment will dictate regulation, and companies will have to actually pay for the amount of carbon they put in the atmosphere. So that means that if you want to be a going concern, you need to hedge that from today. And what does that mean? That means investing today to reduce the amount of carbon you put in the atmosphere, or reduce the amount of energy that your product or service uses when the consumer is using it. So business leaders that realize that they have to hedge against that future are doing something. Then there's a third type of leader. There aren't enough around, unfortunately, who also see this as a business strategy to really differentiate and get ahead. and also deeply care about Earth. And I think at Arçelik, the whole leadership team is very, very committed now. And this is how we've made a big difference. I mean, you know, it's not easy, but it's not as expensive as people think. And I believe consumers are responding.
Okay, excellent. Well, I mean, you talk about consumers. We also see it with employees now. You know, employees are being asked to subscribe to what a company stands for more and more. So, you know, consumers, sure, but you know, people aren't going to want to be part of a company that's, you know, that's acting like it's oblivious to what's happening.
Yeah, Adam, I mean, that's a really important point, and it became a byproduct of my whole Everest expedition. I really wasn't focusing on our internal audience. But in the preparation, every day we actually fed piece by piece some information on sustainability and what was happening to the planet. And actually, I started seeing a shift in the people I work with. They were looking at me saying, well, this guy, you know, he has an amazing job. He has a nice family, 3 kids. Why would he take this risk? Now, what is he trying to do? You know, it's crazy because I mean, risk to life, you can't really risk much more. And that actually brought around this belief, authenticity, and they started following and learning. And then it became a general purpose for the business, whereby engineers in the most distant production plants were coming up with ideas on how to reduce waste, how to recycle the water in the production process, how to use different parts. And it got a life of its own. So I can't dwell enough on this purpose. And really, what makes things happen is a bottom-up approach and a true belief that this is why we're here. And I mean, the shift is incredible. You know, in the past, it would be very difficult for us to hire people from the tech industry, from investment banking. You know, I mean, selling washing machines isn't the sexiest thing on earth, although I love doing it. But now I can comfortably tell you that we're the #1 choice easily for people, young people especially, who want to make a difference.
So this kind of comes on to my next question, which is really about your advice to young leaders and up-and-coming leaders. You know, you talked about a seat at the table. You're talking about really about systems change. Fast systems change is what we need. What's your advice to the next generation of leaders? How should they act? What should they be looking for? What should they be kind of fierce about?
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The IPCC report that came out a few days ago is very damning. I mean, 70,000 pages, right? You're not going to read the whole thing. But I strongly advise, especially young people, to read a concise summary of that report. They will understand how urgent the situation is and how dire the outcome is looking, meaning it's going to directly impact their lives. What do I mean by that? I mean reduced mobility. I mean migration on a scale never experienced by humans. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of people changing place. That always is, by the way, that's always caused wars everywhere. Droughts, floods, severe weather events, which will make food security, shelter questionable. So in the face of that, I urge them to make decarbonization their #1 overreaching goal. You know, I'm a big supporter of ESG, but as a concept, and I'm very careful when I speak about this because it is a controversial view. I am a big supporter of everything under the ESG umbrella, but it's kind of like health, right? Human health. If you have health, everything else matters. It's the same thing with decarbonizing. If we don't stop global warming, nothing else really matters, right? From child labor to women in boards, etc. All of them are nice to haves, but actually we need to focus our energy on decarbonizing. And I think young people need to choose very carefully the companies, services, and goods they buy. They need to choose very carefully where they work, and they really need to become crisp, clear on their understanding with the direction we're heading at the moment. Because actually they have the power to vote governments in or out, and they have the power to make governments pay attention. And unfortunately today, in the world's shifting priorities, right, with geopolitics, with inflation, with war in Ukraine, with energy inflation uncertainty, it's very, very difficult to remain focused. But if we don't stay focused, it's too late. There's no turning back, unfortunately.
This comes back to something else that you said in the film. You said your survival is completely based on nature. How crazy of humanity to think that we could battle nature and win. And it's really that we're trying to get. It's not about individuals. It's about businesses understanding that.
Yeah, this is something that I don't mince my words around either. Elon Musk keeps talking about going to Mars because he's a very smart guy. He understands that what we're trying to do is likely to fail. But actually, he doesn't really have to make much effort, because if we keep doing what we're doing, the Earth is going to look very much like Mars anyway. Without going anywhere. Mm-hmm. I think businesses need to really. You framed it in the context of businesses and their understanding. They need to understand that to have a healthy business, you have to have a healthy planet. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a kind of healthy runway and timeline to be able to plan what you're going to do, whether it's innovation and technology. I'm a big believer in innovation and technology. I think it's going to be a part of the solution, mm-hmm. but it's not the only solution, right? Businesses have to figure out how they can do things in a much cleaner manner. And it's not that difficult. It really is not that difficult. I mean, we have 32 factories around the world. I'll give an Arçelik example. And we quickly realized that, the cost of carbon credits in the future is going to be prohibitive. Mm-hmm. So how do we create our own energy that we use rather than using from fossil fuels? Yeah. And now pretty much every surface around Arçelik on all our factories are solar panels. By the end of this year, and actually by the end of 2024, I'm hoping we get to 120, 130 megabytes, which is megawatts, sorry, which is basically utility scale power production. Mm. We're not in the business of producing power, but we realize that we need to produce in a clean manner the power we use so that we decarbonize the company as fast as we can. This is a small example. And by the way, it makes great business sense. Most of that pays back in under 4 years. Mm. So I think everybody needs to be responsible in terms of the business and platform they run. Clean up, basically reduce the amount of energy and water and materials you use. Mm-hmm. Produce the energy you can where you can. People in their own lives, use solar panels, use heat pumps, reduce the amount of water you consume, shop less, shop local. There's so many things you can do. Reduce the amount of meat you eat. Mm-hmm. So the responsibility comes in multi-layers. But lastly, and the most important piece in all of this is governments and regulation, because without regulation, it's going to be too late. And therefore, we all need to put pressure on governing bodies to regulate much more strictly to clean up the mess we've created.
Sure. I think one of the problems that we see, one of the interviews we did recently was with a woman called Sophie Howe, who's the Minister for Future Generations in Wales, or the first. She's now left office. But she was saying, because you've got CEOs who now have very short tenures, you've got governments that have very short tenures and are interested in making sure they maximize the vote. Having a long-term vision, having something which transcends generations, transcends the change, is quite a rare thing. And it feels like there's this balance needed of sort of immediate action, but that constant view of, okay, where are we going? How can we continue this long journey?
You're so correct. I mean, Sophie was very correct in that comment, because I credit a lot of Arçelik's success here to the Koç family and our shareholders, main shareholders, who have an extreme long-term view in terms of value creation. Right. If you're an American firm which is worried about your quarterly earnings call every quarter, of course, we have to worry about that as well, but it's not the overreaching goal. We are much more long-term in terms of value creation and have all the stakeholders. Our shareholders allow us to do this change. So I think that's right on the money, because having a long-term vision is absolutely critical to be able to change.
Yeah, excellent. So I want to go to the audience. We've got some questions here from Idris Guna. Hakan, thank you for sharing your story. Highly inspiring. Could you please share what kind of actions you're taking in your personal life as an individual?
Well, a lot of things actually, but I think the most important change is awareness of how we spend our money, what we consume, So basically, I have an initiative, Meatless Mondays. It's a simple thing, but we consume much less meat as a family. We consume almost no plastic. My son, in fact, went to a birthday party and created terror when he saw single-use straws being used. And I was like, wait, you know, I couldn't blame him for doing it, but it's a bit much, right? So that's the degree to which at home we're careful, but we're also human. You know, we do indulge in things which everybody likes indulging in. And I fly around for my job. I have to fly everywhere. So there's a balance. You know, you have to be careful not to be hypocritical. I try and offset almost everything we do, but I also enjoy life at the same time. But I'm at least aware of the choices I'm making, and I'm aware of the impact I'm having. As an individual, I think it's really important you invest in your personal space to create your own energy. Solar panels, heat pump, these are changes you can make immediately. Insulate your home, reduce your energy footprint, I think is the most critical. And then we need to electrify everything. So, you know, change your car to an electric car. I know it's controversial, but net on net, eventually we will have to do it. And I think it's beneficial. It also drives innovation, which will bring new battery technology. And be conscious, take the train if you can. Although I tried to take the train last week. I had to go to Paris and the train got canceled and I booked another, it got canceled and I gave up and I had to fly and the flight got canceled. So it's not always straightforward, right? I tried to go with an electric car, but the distance was out of range, you know. So, but keep trying is my message.
Yeah. I'm interested in the plastic-free household. I mean, that just, you know, we use as little as possible. We recycle as much as we can, but that one's tough.
It's very tough. It's very, very tough. I mean, if you go to the supermarket today, they wrap 4 pieces of vegetables in plastic. And, you know, I know for example, Ahold, the CEO of Ahold, who I know, they're tremendous effort to get rid of that. But the whole supply chain is based on using not just plastic, many other nasty things, many nasty things. I mean, from chemicals to agents to basically keep things fresh longer. Unfortunately, the whole food chain is broken, but plastic, you can avoid in many places, and you can definitely recycle everything you use. In our washing machines, for example, we now used, the numbers I forget, but more than 100 million PET water bottles, discarded water bottles, as a reinforcing plastic. So instead of virgin materials, we're collecting from recyclers used water bottles. So, you know, you can look at it from that angle too. And as a company, we're now using discarded fish nets. They're thermoplastics actually, so you can use them in ovens because they're heat resistant. You just have to look at things creatively, and you can't do it yourself. You know, your teams have to be really focused on it.
Another question, a personal one from Denise Pala. I'm interested in this as well. What's been the hardest part of the journey as a business leader?
As I mentioned earlier, people really didn't listen. I mean, once I became aware of the severity of the problem, I became obsessed with it. And it was difficult to get people to really listen, because what it looked like is posturing, right? It looked like I was staking a position for my own gain. And it really wasn't, had nothing to do with it. In fact, it was very risky vis-a-vis the shareholders or my board or anybody else or investors, because essentially nobody in business was taking that stance. And today still, I look back and I pat myself on the back with the risk I took then. But people would not listen to me. I didn't have the credibility, and it was very difficult to bridge the gap, to be able to speak in an understandable way and to be listened to and taken seriously. And I think Everest helped a lot with that. I mean, the short documentary here is great. Why? Because, you know, on that day, we don't talk about it, but it's in the book, you know, many climbers lost their lives, right? I'm lucky to be alive. Very lucky. I'm grateful to be alive. And it's only because nature allowed me to be alive, right? So that realization alone for me is enough to be grateful for the rest of my life. But that allowed me to tell the story in a different way as well. So it makes the documentary more, 13 minutes. I'm sure everybody was very interested watching it. That was the turning point. But the hardest thing for me was really getting people to listen.
One of the things that we interviewed Ellen Windermouth, who was the producer of My Octopus Teacher, and she went on to start a channel called Water Bear. and she said, nobody's ever been converted by a pie chart, but how do we communicate climate science? How do we communicate, environmental, social governance? We need those stories. We need those emotional hooks.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. If we had more of those hooks, more people speaking out, then we would have changed things already a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question, and excuse my pronunciation if it's incorrect, from Mehmet Çelik. Do you think this year's COP will actually do the job? We were both at COP26, 27 saw something else, COP28?
We have to have hope because it's, without hope, we're not humans, right? So we have to have hope. I do believe there will be meaningful change because it's in Dubai, as you know, and they really want to show that they're behind this. We have an oil minister, an ex-oil minister running the show, so he knows exactly what the problem is. I'm hopeful that there will be more progress this time, but this is all managed the wrong way. All the world leaders arrive on the first day. Yeah. They do their photo op and then they leave and then the negotiations begin. Whereas they should all arrive on the last day to be able to shake hands on the disagreements, right? I mean, it's all a little bit convoluted. And this mix of NGOs, activists, government, business, it kind of takes away from the seriousness of the negotiation. So I believe that this will be much more like a kind of NATO gathering this time. Right. Where they're very focused on agreements because governments are also seeing the bill from all of what's happening, right? They're now seeing that the insurance industry can't survive in its current form if these natural anomalies in weather continue. They're also seeing migration is going to become a much bigger problem, which has no solution, and there's no dollars attached to that. That's a existential question again. And the drought is basically food security. The whole world is seeing this. So I think governments are getting more and more serious. So long answer to a short question. I am hopeful.
I think it's a difficult thing because you need some sort of system. You need something that is encouraging everybody to come to the table and talk about it. And then there's also this balance of you want to be inclusive of everybody, but you also need to kind of set the boundaries. Okay, we need to be very clear that this industry needs to change and this industry needs to change or whatever it is. And I think it's very difficult to find that balance sometimes.
I agree.
A question from me too. How do you suggest we bring the youth to the decision table?
That's a very difficult question. I remember meeting a young activist, Clover Hogan, I think her name was, at this COP or the one before. A young woman who actually was very knowledgeable on what's happening and very angry, rightfully so, but also vocal. I believe she has an NGO. And she was doing the right thing. Basically, she was riling businessmen into action. She was basically forcing them very much, people disagree with what Greta is doing. I fundamentally think it's good because it's bringing attention to the severity of the problem and it gives young people a voice. How to get a place at the table is a different manner. I think that has to happen by getting organized and putting pressure on governments because businesses ultimately are always going to be run with the people with more tenure and experience, but that doesn't mean that they don't take advice from young people, right? I specifically make sure that I take advice from young people because they have a very different perspective. I mean, it's their livelihood. I've had a great life, right? I've had good experiences. I've had success, but ultimately my children's life is going to be fundamentally different. And I care about it because I know, right? I think most older people, or let's say middle-aged people, are still unaware of the severity of the problem. So basically raise your voice wherever you can.
Okay, that's good advice. We've got time for one more. Zahera, do you think sustainable growth or degrowth will solve the climate crisis? We have this concept of continuous growth, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, the whole system is broken, and I blame economists. Actually, our economist professor forefathers, because the current economic system was pretty much devised in academia. Yeah, they forgot somehow to give a value to nature, which is a diminishing resource. Right? Any other market mechanism values supply and demand, and as supply decreases, prices go up because it's how our markets function.
Absolutely.
Somehow they forgot to give a value to nature. So this is what the whole concept around carbon pricing is, roughly. Now, degrowth definitely is a solution, but it also brings problems with it, right? I mean, overpopulation is part of the problem, maybe the biggest cause of the problem, but then depopulating the world is also another problem, because we've always been used to living in growth and abundance, and our lives are fundamentally different than our forefathers because we have continually been bringing innovation, efficiency, and wealth creation, and all of this has enabled us to live these very comfortable lives, which will change in a degrowth environment. And we don't know what that would look like. But a glimpse of it, I went walking in Kyushu in Japan, absolutely stunning nature. And you come by these towns where you have mannequins in restaurants, at gas stations, so that people won't feel alone. Literally, wherever you go, you have mannequins of people dressed in clothes and families that are not real, just so that the residents don't feel completely alone, because there are no people left. You go by houses and farmsteads which have been, rewilded, which I very much appreciate as somebody that loves nature. But if you think of what that does to the fabric of that community, it's a different question, right? An aging society. So the world faces a multitude of problems, and the solutions are not very straightforward. But I do believe finding a different economical model where we value the diminishing resources that nature provides us, biodiversity, rainforests. I mean, the list is so long. Water, very basic, water, air. Once we value these things more precisely in our models, I think we can figure out a way to grow without growing the population any further, maybe even depopulating, but at the same time preserving the way of life that we have. I'm hopeful.
I think it's really interesting, because for me it comes back to the question of, and I'm hoping the answer is going to change soon, is what is a successful company? How do we measure success? And if we put a value on things like air, like water, like things like that, where business is concerned, then the conversation starts to change. We aren't subconsciously going, well, if they're not profitable for a couple of years, they're obviously not a good company. I agree with you that there still needs to be this level of sustainability, but we need to be asking the right questions and valuing the right things.
I can't agree more. I mean, we are fighting everywhere to have water fully closed loop. I mean, we've committed to reducing all of our emissions of the appliances we produce by 50% in the next 350 weeks. If you ask me, I have no idea how we're going to do it, by the way. The technology doesn't exist yet. But all I can say is we promise to do it. So we'll actually put money towards it, resources towards it, and innovate. So having that vision of where you want to create value and how you want to do it, and then actually going after it, is the first step. And it's the only thing we can really do at the moment.
Excellent. We're coming to the top of the hour. I guess a couple of final questions from me before we sign off. What keeps you going? I mean, it's fairly overwhelming, I think, for most people, especially as it's becoming more urgent. What keeps you going? How do we keep our feet on the ground and stay focused on the right thing?
I see change in people that listen to me. I see change in the company and true purpose, authenticity, and that keeps me going. I also, as I told you, I really keep at the forefront of my mind that goal that I set for me all those years ago, that when my children are adults, I want to be able to look them in the eye and say I did everything I possibly could when I had the chance to. And I realized that I need to keep doing things. I'm a bit, after my experience on Everest, I'm a bit less inclined to take that level of risk, but I will continue to take risk to raise awareness. And I have a few projects coming up, because I think now that I have the credibility and I guess I have an audience, I need to create more content that draws attention to the immediate priorities. And before we sign off, I really want to emphasize that decarbonizing is like human health. If we don't do it, nothing else matters. So we just need to be obsessed with the idea of of how much carbon we're putting in the atmosphere, how we're going to bring it down, and the immediate impact that has on our lives is going to be so severe in the coming. I live now in Amsterdam, which is 5 meters below sea level. I don't know if this will be livable if it's 8 meters or 10 meters below sea level, which is very, very likely, by the way.
Yeah.
So, these are, huge concepts to think about.
I think that's a very good place to finish is because, again, the overwhelmingness comes from where the hell do we start? What is it that we're supposed to be focusing on, and whose responsibility is it? But if it's a case of, look, decarbonization is, if there was one message that you had of something to focus on, decarbonization, is it?
Definitely decarbonization. Okay. In every sense of the word. Like, really understand what your carbon footprint is. Doesn't matter if it's a business, household, individual, and do everything in your power to reduce that.
Okay. Hakan, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure, as always. We've talked a few times now. I love getting your perspective, and thank you for sharing. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you.
Listening.
Cheers.